to episode 101 of my Doll's House Diary. Now in today's episode I'm going to be showing you how to make this wonderful little dual storage roll top bread bin. So let's head into the craft room and back in time to yesterday morning and get started. Okay, so begin by cutting the pieces shown in the cutting list, and these pieces make up the main body of the bread bin. What we'll then do is work out the sizes for the other pieces as we go along, and I'll give you those sizes during the tutorial. And that's just because when you're building something this small, it's difficult to know exactly what sizes the sort of internal pieces need to be. So for example, the little runners for the roll top, it's difficult to work that out until you've actually built the piece. So like I say, we'll build this bit and then we'll work out all of the other measurements on camera. And you can cut those pieces with me as we go along. So the first thing we're going to do is shape the side pieces, and we're going to create a curve at each top corner. So bring those two pieces in, they can all be pushed out of the way. And then cut yourself a paper template to the same size as the side piece. And we're going to come in along the top, so narrow edge by 10 millimeters, and I'll give you that measurement in inches as well. So that's 25/64 of an inch, and then turn and come down the long edge by 7.5 millimeters, like that, and that is 19/64 of an inch. We're then going to draw a curve between those 2 points. Like that. So cut that out. And we can then use that template to shape both pieces, and that way we'll get them identical. So position the template onto your piece of wood, but so that you're leaving enough room for your pencil nib. So just sort of bring it over a little bit and down a little bit, just so that you can draw the entire curve onto the piece of wood, like that, and then copy it on. Do that on both pieces. So bring in your scribe tool, and that's rather like a pen, but with a nice sharp pointed metal tip. And we're just going to score our curve into the wood. So just small movements like that. We're not trying to cut through or anything or make a very deep groove, but just little movements just to score the line in. And then I always find that by doing this, you're more likely to keep the blade of your knife on track when we actually come to cut it out. So just like that, you're making a small groove into the wood there. You can then bring in your knife, and I've just put a new blade in here. And then what you can do is just go over that line again just using your knife as if it's a pencil. So you're just sort of drawing that line into the wood. And then you can just sort of go over it again, just to go through a little bit deeper and then actually work to cut the wood away. And you can just use the very tip of the knife, just to sort of cut it away like that. And don't worry if you've got a rough edge, because we will then actually be sanding this as well. So as the pieces start to come away, you can sort of chip them away like that. And when you're using the knife in this way, just always be careful of your fingers. So always just be aware of where they are in relation to the blade, and try not to put them behind the blade as you're cutting. Like that. So do that with the other side piece as well. So And then bring in a small piece of finer grade sandpaper. I've got a 500 here, and just sand that around. You want to make it into a nice curve, so get rid of any sort of little sharp edges at the edges of the curve, so you haven't got any little points there. Like that. Do that with both of them. And then what you can do is just put them together, line them up like that at the straight edges, and then sand as one piece, just to even them up. So we've now got two opposite facing side pieces. So now bring in your rule, we're going to make a pencil mark in the centre at the bottom of each side piece. So just do a little pencil mark there like that, very faint. Same with the other one. And then wrap your sandpaper around a round pencil. And I say that just because you don't want one of the pencils, you know, that is the, is it pentagon? Don't know how many sides there is there, but you don't want a shaped pencil. So wrap the sandpaper around like that, or you can use a paintbrush. And then we're just going to sand a little dip above our central pencil mark. So just begin sanding very gently. And you can see we're just making a little rounded cutout there, or half round. And keep going till that's about 1.5 millimeters or 2 millimeters high. Like that. Do the same with the other one. And again, place those two pieces together and sand them as one, and then you'll get that nice even shape at the bottom there. So before we begin construction, prepare your pieces by giving them all a gentle sand, and then we can remove the sanding dust using a soft brush. Now I am actually just going to be leaving my bread bin as natural wood, but if you wanted to apply wood dye, I would recommend applying that before construction, and then as we cut the extra pieces as we go along, you can apply wood dye to those again before we actually attach them to the bread bin. Now I did think about doing mine in walnut because my farmhouse style kitchen is predominantly walnut, but then I thought it may get sort of lost on the work surface. So I thought it would stand out more in pine or in natural wood, and I've also got a natural wood dish drainer in there which looks really nice, so it will match with that. Okay, so I'm going to prepare the pieces now. So just sand each of them, just using your 500 grade sandpaper and small circular motions. Once you've sanded all of the pieces, use your soft brush to remove the sanding dust. Okay, so we're going to begin by marking up the back and side pieces for placement of the shelf and the bottom piece. And so we don't have to do that 3 times, I'm going to join them together. So line them up along the top there and just put a little bit of masking tape on to hold them together. And then just put a tiny bit at the bottom as well Turn it lengthways like that, and we're going to begin by making a pencil mark 16mm or 5/8 of an inch from the top edge. So go along your side piece as far as your straight edge goes and come down from there. So 16mm, 5/8 of an inch, do a little pencil mark there, and then the same at the other side, going again from the straight edge of the side piece. Turn and join those up. And our little central shelf will sit just above this line. I'm just placing the rule just below the pencil marks to allow for the thickness of the pencil nib. Go along like that. And then just turn it around like that and just move those bottom pieces of tape up a little bit. And we're going to do a line that goes level with the back, at the bottom of the back piece. So again, line up your rule so you're just above the bottom edge, and then draw a line along like that. I'll just pick that up and show you. So the lines on the side pieces are level with the bottom of the back piece, and that will just help when we're placing the bottom piece to make sure that we're straight along the sides. So you can now remove the masking tape, and we're ready to begin construction. And the reason I said there earlier about applying the wood dye before construction, just in case I didn't explain that, is just that that cuts down then on your glue residue marks. So if you were to build this first and then apply the wood dye, any little glue residue marks that are showing sort of between the joins or that you've sort of splashed accidentally onto the pieces will show up. So that's why I always like to apply the wood dye first when I'm doing a wood dyed project. Okay, so to actually construct then, we're going to begin by attaching the side piece to the outer edge of the back piece. So apply glue along the side of the back piece. Get a couple of cocktail sticks there. Lay that down. Attach the side so that the top is flush with the top of the back piece, and your pencil lines will line up. Put that into position and give it a press. I'm also just going to grab a piece of strip wood and then just use that to press the pieces together. And this way you'll get an even pressure all the way along the join. So give that a good press. Just push that along your work surface like that to make sure it's not sticking. And we're just going to leave about 30 seconds or so between each sort of attachment, just to let the glue dry before we move on to the next piece. So we're now going to attach the top piece, and that will sit in there on the inside edge of those joined pieces. So apply glue to a long and a short edge. Sit that in there so it's right at the top of the back piece. And what you can actually do here is bring in your piece of strip again and just lay that along the top of the back piece and then press that up against it. And then you know you've got that nice straight edge. So press it down and then you can just push it against the side as well. Like that, and make sure you've got that nice flush edge along the top there. Get rid of any excess glue on the inside. We don't want anything there that's going to hinder our roll top. Oops. Like that. Again, we'll just let that dry off for 30 seconds or so. We're now going to glue the shelf piece into place, and this is going to sit just above the pencil line, but so that we're hiding the line when we glue it into place. So again, apply glue to a long and a short edge. And then sit that into place so that you're sort of on the higher edge of the line but hiding it as well. Get it lined up and then you can pull the side piece in to meet it. Again, making sure you're sort of hiding that line on the side there. And then give it all a really good press. Press and hold. So we're now ready to attach the bottom piece, and that will sit again on the inside edge there, flush with the bottom of the back and then along our pencil line on the side there. So again, you know the drill by now. Apply glue to a short edge and a long edge. Set that into place. Use your strip if that helps, just put it alongside the side piece. Push that against it. And then just make sure as well that you're along that line on the side. And hiding the pencil mark if you can as well. Again, give it all a good press and hold. So now lay the bread bin onto its side like that and apply glue to all of the open edges. Lay it down and then attach the remaining side, making sure you're flush along the top and lined up with all of the pencil lines. So you can just sort of pick it up like that, make sure that you're getting it in the correct position. Hiding the pencil lines on the inside. Make sure you've got a nice flush top edge there. When you're putting the last piece on, there's always a lot to check. Make sure you're along that line on the bottom as well. And once you're happy with the position, you can give it all a good press and hold. And then what we'll do is put a bit of masking tape around it. So don't forget to remove any excess glue from the inside. Like that. And then what we'll do is put a piece of tape right across the front. So come from the side there like that. Give it all a good press, making sure you're not knocking anything out of place. And then wrap your tape around. That can then be left to dry. So once you've allowed enough time for the glue to dry, remove the masking tape and then sand wherever you need to. I actually like to sand along all of the flat areas, so that's the top and the back. I've also sanded along these two front edges here, just by holding the piece against my sandpaper like that and going around in circular motions. And then I also sanded along the sides, just where the masking tape had pulled up some splinters of wood. So we're now ready to start cutting some extra pieces, and we're going to start with the little pieces to go inside to work as the rollers for the roll top. So from your 1.5mm sheet wood, 1/16 of an inch, cut two pieces measuring 16mm by 12mm, and that's 5/8 of an inch by 1/2 an inch. And then to shape these, we're actually going to use the template that we used to shape the side. So I've actually done a little practice piece here. So if I sort of lay that onto the template, you can see how that's going to work. So the front curve there actually fits along the front curve. And then we're just going to curve it off at the back as well. So your height from top to bottom is the 12mm. If I just lay that on there and show you. Like that. You don't need this template again, so you can actually cut this to size. So let's actually do it on the template, which will make it easier. So take a measurement from the straight edge nearest to the curve down by 12mm or 1/2 an inch like that, and draw a line going across, always remembering to place your rule just below the pencil marks to allow for the thickness of your pencil nib. And then let's just bring that in like that. And then you want to go along that line by your 16mm. So do a little pencil mark there, 16, and it's going to be easier to come in from the back. So this was 21mm, so you want to come in from the back 5mm or 13/64 of an inch. So do a little line there like that as well. Again, join that up, and you can then cut out that section. Now, if you think you might want to make another bread bin, then you can keep this, but just cut yourself another one and then cut this little template from it. That's what I did to make that one. So cut across like that. And then like that. And then I'm going to give you the measurement for the curve at the back. So lay that on there. So you want to do a little line coming in from the back, again by the 5mm or 13/64 of an inch. So that will be along the top there, and then down the back, that is 6mm or 1/4 of an inch. And then you'll draw your curve between those two. So cut that out. Now I've actually written a little F and B on mine because the front and back are actually different. So it might be a good idea to write that onto your template, and then when we shape the piece we'll write it onto the wood as well, just so we remember which way in we need to stick them. So let me just tidy up my desk a bit. So again, draw your little template onto the first piece of wood. Like that. And then you can just put a little very faint F there for front, along the front edge. And they are very slightly different shapes because obviously the back starts a little bit further back than the front one. So again, bring in your scribe and just score that into the wood. Let me move over a little bit so I'm actually on camera. Like that. We're then going to cut that out. Again, starting by using the knife just like a pencil to draw that in. Just very faintly in there. Go over again and then you can work to start cutting it out. Careful of your fingers. And you can cut and chip away as you go. Never be tempted to pull the wood away before you've actually cut through, otherwise you might split the piece that you're trying to keep. Again, bring in your sandpaper and tidy up that edge. Like that. Do the same with your other piece, and then again lay them together and sand as one to get those nice and even. Make sure they're flat along the bottom there. This way our bread bin will sort of roll open more smoothly. And then where you've got your front edge there, you want to turn that bit over and write it on the opposite side. So when they're laid together like that, this is the front edge, but because it's opposite, you want to write it on the back like that. So lay them like that. And then this will be the front of your right hand roller, and that's the front of the left hand roller. So you can put a little L there and a little right there, or half a right, just so we remember which way around to stick those. So erase the little pencil marks or your letters on the first runner and apply glue to the back. And then we're going to stick this into place, so we're leaving about 1mm along the front edge. So just sort of lay that in there like that, and then you want about 1mm, 1/32 of an inch along this front edge here. Make sure as well that it's sitting flat against the shelf, like that, and then you can give it a press into place. Remove the excess glue as well. It's important you do that while it's still wet, otherwise that will create a little line of little sort of bubbles around there. And we might have trouble getting the bread bin roller to go in, or roll top. Like that. You can then erase the letters on your second one. Again, apply your glue to the back. And again, attach that so you're leaving that 1mm along the front edge. Push it right down against the shelf. And if you're not very good at checking by eye, you can bring your rule in and just measure the very end there. Make sure you're the same distance away from the front edge. Again, get rid of any excess glue and just give those a press. Make sure they're sitting firmly in there. What I'm actually going to do is just put a couple of mini clamps on, just to hold those into place whilst I cut the strips for the roll top. Let's get one there like that, and then one on there like that. So pop that to one side to dry. We're now ready to cut the slats for the roll top, and for that I'm using 0.8mm thick sheet wood, and that's 1/32 of an inch. And you want to cut it to just under 32mm, or 1 17/64 of an inch. Let me just check that. Yeah, 1 17/64 of an inch. You want to go just under, so you've got a little bit of room to move it in there. So the 32mm is actually the width of our top piece there. So you want it just shy of that. Otherwise it's going to be too tight a fit. And our actual roll top is going to be 25mm high. So we want to cut enough slats to cover that measurement. And I'm going to make them 1mm, or I think actually 1mm is 3/64 of an inch wide. And how you actually want to cut those is make your first measurement. So just do a little pencil mark at each end of the wood, and then make your cut. Like that, and then measure and cut again. What you don't want to do is just do lots of millimetre measurements all the way down like that, because then each time you make a cut they'll be getting narrower and narrower. So it's always best to measure each individual piece, whatever you're cutting. Never make more than one pencil mark on your piece of wood. Okay, so I've cut 15 of those. I think we'll probably only need about 12, but I've cut 15 just because I've cut some of them quite narrow. But obviously I can let you know exactly how many I used, and then you can cut the exact number that you're going to need. And then one of those you want to be slightly thicker, So I've cut one here that is 2 millimeters, and that's 5/64 of an inch, and that will be the bottom slat on the roll top and the one that we attach our little sort of pull knob to. So what I've done here is attach a piece of masking tape, sticky side up, to my piece of card. I've secured it to the card with another couple of pieces, and then I've secured the card to my desk, just so it doesn't move around whilst I'm working on it. And you want to make sure you've got at least sort of 50 millimeters or 2 inches there to work on, even though that's more than we need. But then once they're all attached, we can trim along each edge to get a nice neat edge. So begin then by placing your 2 millimeter strip along the bottom edge of the tape so that it sits nice and straight along there. Then press it down. And don't worry about the pencil marks on these pieces, because we will actually sand them once they're attached. It's going to be too difficult to sand them, all of these little tiny pieces. And then bring in your next one, and you only want to leave a sort of hair's width between them. So just lay that on there. Again, press it down, and then just work your way up, making sure you're keeping them nice and straight at this left-hand edge here. Make sure you're not angling them either. Okay, so once they're all attached, you can remove the tape from your card. You stick it onto your cutting mat like that. I'm going to stick it along a straight edge there. So before we trim it to size, just bring in your piece of 500 grade sandpaper again and just sand the surface. And that will get rid of your pencil marks. Okay, like that, and then use your soft brush again to remove the sanding dust from between the slats. And we're now ready to trim it to size. And I don't think I actually said there, but the thickness of my masking tape is 25 millimeters or 1 inch. And I think that's pretty standard for a roll of masking tape, but just double check. And that's really the sort of thickness that you want. So if you're using a thinner one, then you can just stick 2 strips along like that. Okay, so let's trim this away. So just trim very carefully down each edge. That, and there's our roll top, and we can now try that for size. Okay, so just push it into place at the top like that, and then wrap it around so it's finishing at the bottom there, along the bottom edge. So that sits in there quite nicely, and then you want to make sure that you can open it for display, so it will sort of feed down the back there like that, and then it will sit open like that. I think I've got a pretty good fit there. If you find that it's sticking anywhere, it could be that you just need to trim a little bit off either side, but only ever trim a tiny bit at a time. I'll actually probably just display mine closed in the doll's house, but it's really nice if you ever want to sort of do a little close-up photo or something like that, or a little display, that you can actually have it open. I think that sits in there quite nicely. But like I say, if you're not happy with how it's opening and closing, just make some tiny adjustments. It might even be that you've got a little bit of masking tape overhanging or something that's stopping it from working. But what I'm actually going to do with my entire bread bin, once we've done our little bottom door as well, is apply some wax. And what you can then do is put a little bit of wax along each side of the roll top. And I find as well that that then helps that sort of mechanism. But I'm quite pleased with that so far. So we'll make the little bottom door, and then we'll make the little sort of door knobs there. And I'm just going to use a cocktail stick to do that. Okay, but let's cut the pieces then for the bottom door. So for the little sort of pull down door at the bottom, I'm again using my 1.5mm sheet wood, 1/16 of an inch. And again, I've cut 2 strips measuring the 32mm. And I cut it just under that measurement so that it fits nicely into the opening there. And that's that 1 17/64 of an inch. So cut it just under that measurement. And then the side pieces I've cut to 7mm or 9/32 of an inch. So then when you put the 4 pieces together, your height measurement is the height of the opening there. So mine's 11mm. So you might just want to check yours, because if you've sort of placed the middle shelf or that bottom piece slightly out, then that will affect the size of the opening. So measure that and then just make sure that your top and bottom strips and your side strips, when put together, equal the height or just under of the opening there. So we're going to glue these together, and then I'm actually going to put a piece of mesh behind mine. I'm going to be using this mesh, and this is sculptor's mesh. I bought mine as a pack of A4 sheets in different size and thicknesses just from eBay. So if you just want to search for sculptor's mesh. And the little diamonds on this one are actually 2.5mm or 3/32 of an inch high, and that's called the aperture. So I'm afraid I don't know the gauge or what gauge it is, but like I say, the aperture is 2.5mm, and this is the diamond one. But you may already have something like this in your craft drawers, or you could use a clear acrylic, acetate or perspex if you've got something. And for that you could use a piece of acetate from some packaging, food packaging or something like that. You only need a tiny piece. Or you could just make a solid door, so you would just cut 1 piece of sheet wood to fit in the bottom there. Okay, but I'm going to glue these together now into my frame. So you might want to use tweezers to handle these smaller parts. So put a little bit of glue at the top and bottom of your side pieces. Down. And then just glue those between the top and bottom pieces, so you've got nice flush edges along the sides. That bottom piece in. Make sure it's all square. And then give it a press together. Press and hold. So whilst that's drying, I actually want to put a little door stop into place. And for that, I've cut a piece again, just under 32mm or 1 17/64 of an inch from a piece of 1.5mm strip. So I'm going to stick that to the top of the middle shelf, so that it's sitting 1.5mm or 1/16 of an inch back from the front edge. And I'm just going to measure that by eye. And again, it might help to use your tweezers here. And I just want to stick that in there. And then that door will just sort of sit against that when it closes. So line it up in there. Just get the top door out of the way there. And then press it into place. Press and hold. So once you've allowed enough time for the little frame to dry, you can try that into place. So that should slot nicely in there. If you need to do any sanding, then just do a little bit at a time and then try it into place again. just so that you don't take too much off and then have sort of lots of gapping. And mine is a little on the tight side, but I actually quite like that. I prefer that to having gaps. So I'm actually going to try and use some paper hinges to attach the door, but what you could do is put another strip in along the bottom and then just glue that into place once you've attached your perspex or your mesh. Or you could just sort of slot it in there so that you can remove it when you want to, if you wanted to sort of put some things in the bottom or change the display at all. But like I say, I'm going to have a go with some paper hinges just so that we can open and close that as we do with the sort of roll top. And for that, I'm just using this dark brown paper, and I've cut 2 pieces measuring 6mm or 1/4 inch square. So fold them in half. Make a nice sharp crease. Do that with both of them. And then what we're going to do is actually stick the first 2 to the bottom at the back of the door. So I might just need to trim so that they're not actually overhanging the opening. So just sort of lay them into place. And we'll just go on the inside of that sort of outer frame there. Yes, let me just trim a little bit off, just on that one edge, because then you've got more to sort of stick down inside. Just go like that. And then put a bit of glue on. And we'll stick that, it's going to come sort of about 1.5 millimeters in from that side. Press that down. And then put another one at the other end. Okay, and I'm just going to start by trimming that so that it's not overhanging the frame. Okay, so let those dry into place for a moment. So I'm now ready to glue the mesh into place, and for that I'm using a bit of super glue, and I've actually just had to cut the bottle to get this out, so it's at the very end of the bottle. So let's just put a little bit around the frame. It's quite stringy when it gets to this sort of age. I'm not a fan of super glue, as you probably know. Sometimes you just need something a little bit stronger. Okay, lay that into place. Spare cocktail stick to press that down. Okay, so that can now be left to dry. So whilst the mesh is drying into place, I'm going to make 2 little doorknobs for the roll top and the door, and I'm going to do that using a cocktail stick. So begin by cutting off the pointed end, and it helps to cut it if you roll it along underneath your knife like that. Like that, and then bring in a piece of sandpaper, and I'm using something a bit stronger this time, so a 180, and you just want to twist the cocktail stick around in your hand and sweep the sandpaper over the top just to round that off. So keep going until you've got a nice sort of rounded end there. Like that, and then you can trim that to be about 2 millimeters long. But you don't have to measure it, just hold on to the rounded end like that. And then again, use your cocktail stick just to trim that off. Again, trying to roll it along if you can. Be careful of your nails. Like that. And there we have our first little doorknob. Oops. So make a second one of those. Okay, so we're now ready to attach the door and try out our hinges. So sort of lay them flat like that and then apply the glue. And then you want to position them so they're just a little bit back from the front edge. So sort of try and hold on to the door and then use something to push them flat against the bottom in there, but so that they're about, you know, 1.5 mm back to allow for the thickness of the actual door. So sit them in there like that, and you can just check that the door's along the front edge there. So close the door up like that. We'll just let those hinges dry into place for a moment. So my hinges aren't fully dry yet, but once they are, you'll be able to open your door. Not all the way flat, but you'll be able to open it enough just to do a little display in there if you wanted to. Otherwise, you can just, like I say, stick that into place and just have it as a fixed door. So I now want to just attach the little doorknobs that we've just made. I'm going to bring that down like that, and I just want to start by making a little pencil mark in the centre. And I'll start with the bottom door there. Make a mark in the centre there, just a little dot. And you don't need to do one on the roll top because we can just line it up with the little doorknob here. So let's bring my tweezers in again. Take my first little doorknob there. Pop a bit of glue on. Glue that into place. Press, and then you can turn it around like that, might make it easier to get to. And we're just going to put one in the centre there on that bottom slat. Okay, so what I want to do now is just add a little bit of clear wax to this piece. And for that, I've actually got this very old tin of beeswax furniture polish, and this has got a lovely lavender fragrance to it. And I'm actually going to apply it with a cotton bud or a Q-tip. I only want to get a little bit on there. I'll just start at the back there. And it just very, very slightly darkens the colour of the wood and gives it a nice rich look. And it even brings out the grain, even in, you know, this beachy craft wood that I'm using. And you can use a beachy or basswood. I wouldn't recommend balsa wood for such a small project because it's got a very open grain along the edges of the wood as well. I'm actually going to take the roll top out and apply some to that separately. So I just want to get a tiny little bit around the runners there, which will help that roll top glide more smoothly. Get a cleaner stick. Okay, so that's the entire bread bin done. And then I'm just going to put some actually onto the roll top. And then also just along each side, just a little bit. smell nice. Just pop that back in. I'll go and wash the wax off my fingers in a moment. But there we are. Our completed dual storage bread bin. I really love that. Okay, so now for the exciting part. Let's go and pop this into place. And there it is in place. And I think that already looks really at home over in that corner. Okay, so that's it for today's tutorial. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. Do let me know in the comments section what you think and if you're going to have a go at making it. And if you're not already a subscriber to the channel, then please do subscribe if you've enjoyed this tutorial. I share a video here every Friday afternoon, and you can find more content from me over on my Patreon channel. I'd really appreciate it if you'd give the video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and if you could hype the video as well, that would be really appreciated. Okay, but that's it for today, and I'll see you again next Friday. So until then, take care. Bye.